Welcome to Volume 3 of Rubyisms. We've talked about this on a couple episodes previously. These are sort of nuggets of philosophy that I've published. I've collected in a couple different newsletters that I've written. And it's me trying to communicate ideas or philosophies or sort of ways I see the world that I don't think you hear everywhere else, and trying to do that in a short, pithy way. So let's talk about them. Here's producer Jeremiah McVay.
Hey, Matt. Yeah, so as I've said on previous episodes, these are ones that I selected because I wanted to ask you about them for some reason. Maybe it was something I related to myself and that's why I chose it, or maybe I wanted to get your take on it because I kind of knew what it meant, but maybe not quite, and wanted to pin it down, or maybe I just wanted to hear you tell an example from your own life about it. So, with all that in mind, here is our first one. I think this one connects to, I think, stuff we've talked about particularly recently on the podcast of the idea of, call it digital clutter if you want. But we'll have so many photos of so much nothing and no one will look at them. Meanwhile, your grandparents had a few photos in a shoebox and viewed them hundreds of times.
Yeah, I think, well, there's one thing about how we actually store things, just from a nuts and bolts
Yeah.
perspective, that like let's say you have music on a CD right now, like how much longer are you even going to be able to play that anywhere? Like these actual storage formats, will they even exist? We're putting everything in the cloud. Will we have access to that cloud account, in 20 years? Like, so just physically, we may not be able to access all of the photos and data and music and so many other things that we think we'll have in perpetuity. So I think that's something to consider. And then, yeah, just, the fact that a photo used to be something special, it's
Yeah.
like that, used to have a roll of 36 photos on a roll of film. And if you got one good shot out of that 36, that was like successful from a photography standpoint. And then you save that, or maybe it was at, a wedding or a bar mitzvah or something like that. You would get family photos taken. And then, yeah, I remember my parents or my grandparents having like photo albums or a shoebox. Filled with things, and actually looking at them. There's photos that I have that are prints from old photo albums, and like I look at them frequently, but like so much of this digital stuff
Yeah.
I have from like the past 10 or 15 or 20 years, like it's just sort of like kind of lost in this vacuum. And then also, I think it ties in with a little bit of like this, whenever you see this, shot of the Pope or of like a Taylor Swift concert or something like that, how many people are just experiencing it through their phone screen? Like, so I think part of that is tied up in this idea, in my view, of like our constant need to photograph things, and how it's putting a barrier in between us and the thing that we're actually experiencing, and how that's happening all the time in ways that we don't always recognize, and what that's doing to us, as opposed to experiencing the moment in the moment. We're constantly trying to capture it for some future moment that may or may not even exist when we want to like reflect
Right.
upon this thing. So I think that's probably baked into that notion a little bit too.
There's one thing that I do think comes out of our ability now to take so many photos. You can get it right more easily now, so to speak. Like I often will take like multiple photos of like say my wife or my child or something and then be like and it takes me a while to get to capture the moment as I see it, like as I want to see it, as I want to capture it. And like especially with my kid, it's hard to get them to sit still for a photo. So it's like I will take 20 photos and have one that I really want to keep. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm deleting all of them. I probably should that didn't capture that, but there is that nice trade-off there, I think, of like being able to actually capture the moment, not be worried about film or the money that film costs or the space that it takes up or anything like that. So I don't know, maybe that's a upside to it.
To go to the wabi sabi, or within photography, there was actually sort of the school of thought called lomography. It was based on these Lomo
Yeah, yeah.
cameras, like these old,
Right.
like sort of Soviet cameras that were made. And basically, there became like a whole sort of mindset about it too, of like, you're not going to capture things perfectly. Things will be blurry or out of focus, or but you know what? That's going to be part of the charm. That there,
Yeah.
you'll accept that you won't get like the perfect in focus, perfectly lit shot every time, but instead you'll capture the reality of the moment. and that will have a beauty all in itself.
Yeah.
But I certainly get why you want to have photos of your kid that aren't blurry. You know, like it makes
Yeah.
sense. I think it's just, for the amount of photos that we are all going to have of our children during this era compared to any preceding era is mind blowing. And who is going to want to see all of them? Who is it?
Yeah.
Who is
Yeah.
it for? We're constantly capturing these, thousands, hundreds of thousands of photos of our children, like every year.
Yeah.
For who? Like where
That is
where are
true.
they going? And I just think we don't always examine like what's the, this is just gets into, Instagram influencer, mentality too, of like, who are we doing this for? What is being captured and why and for whom? And it's satiating some immediate pleasure or gratification or something, but is it really accomplishing the thing that we're telling ourselves it's accomplishing? I think is a question to be mindful of.
I think just going back to kind of what you said near the start, I think I do want to say also that like those physical photos, they're also not perfect. Like not just for the reasons you were laying out, the like the lomography idea and like imperfections being an interesting thing to keep and hold on to and cherish, but also like I recently actually worked on a project, an archival project, where I was helping to basically review somebody's entire 30-year career as a teacher. And I was in charge of like putting together like a slideshow for it, a video essentially. And looking back through a bunch of photos to try to pick some out, so many of them were so faded. I'm like, this is not how this photo originally looked. But like those old Kodaks, they didn't keep really as well as people thought they would. And I was showing some to my mom, and she's like, "Yeah, I regret taking the pictures with that camera now because like I don't have those pictures anymore. Essentially, like you can barely see it. So there is a downside to that stuff, even if it was a more cherished item. It's still those decay as well.
Sure. Yeah. I don't think this is one where there's a binary, like this
Yeah,
is right and
totally,
this is
totally.
wrong. But
Yeah.
like, I think,
I'm just teasing it out a
sure.
little,
Yeah. No, I think a lot of these are more like, oh, let's be mindful of this, or let's think about it in some other way. Or I think
Yeah.
even with like the lomography thing, I'm just like super confident that that will have a comeback in the next
Yeah.
10 or 20 or 30 years. Some teenagers will be like, I'm going to get this camera. I'm going to do prints, things just as just sort of a pendulum swinging the opposite way. Maybe I think Be Real is the name of that app. And there's some photo app that almost is
Mhm.
the anti Instagram on some level of like,
Yeah, yeah. I think it is Be Real.
yeah, it's like, shoot at whenever at this exact time and just wherever you are, and it's going to disappear in a day, and that there's something valuable about that too. So
Yeah.
I think there's more than one way to do this right, and that it might be different for different people, but just sort of thinking about what you're shooting, and as opposed to just being mindless about it.
Hey, man, who knew that the late 90s, early 2000s had the best model of like you go and you shoot on a disposable camera and they give you back a roll of printed pictures and a CD with all the files on it that you can print out later too.
I mean, Polaroid is pretty great too. I mean, Polaroids are like that's when you're at a party and someone has one and gives it to you, and
Yeah.
you shake it, and like then you got it,
That
put it on the fridge afterwards. There's something magical about that.
That's what I was actually talking about. That's the one that fades. I said Kodak before, but I meant Polaroid. Those pictures, some of them didn't last. Anyway, let's move on. We've explored this one quite a bit. Let your weight be absorbed by the ground, and in parentheses, lesson from yoga. Okay, so this gets to something for me of like I've tried yoga at different times in my life. It's just not something I've ever stuck to, even though I think I probably should. It would be good for me to do that. But the thing I tend to have problems with when I'm doing the yoga stuff, like, is, like, trying to figure out, like, the language that some of these instructors use of, like, um, push your weight into the ground. Like, I can understand that, but, like, how do you actually do it?
Yeah, breathe through your back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Or like lace up your rib cage or some shit like that. I'm like, what am I supposed to be doing here? Can you just tell me the physics of what I need to do here to make this work? But yeah, Well, explain this one to me in your own words.
Sure.
I guess those are your own words, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Like a lot of these are just sort of like a prism
Yeah.
through which to see a bigger idea or concept. Let your weight be absorbed by the ground. Lesson from yoga. I mean, I think there's some different ways this work. So first of all, I'm not a huge yogi or whatever either, but I did notice. So I think I'm intrigued as someone who cares about words a lot when someone is speaking words to me and giving me instructions and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. I don't know what you mean. So to tie into your sort of setup here, but I think that to me is interesting in its own regard of like, oh, they're using the best words they can. Maybe there aren't words to
Right.
really
Okay.
like
Yeah.
explain what you're supposed to be doing. But let your weight be absorbed by the ground. I think just talking extemporaneously is like like whatever is happening, let it happen. Like whatever your body contains, let it rest on the floor. Like this is where you are. Let your ass sit there. Let your back rest there. Like appreciate the ground for supporting you. Notice gravity. Just sort of like this is reality. And also sometimes what I've noticed within meditation or yoga or something like relax your face. And it'll be something
Right.
where I would be like, oh wow, I never noticed like how much tension I'm just carrying around in my face all the time. Like what a ridiculous thing. And I
Right.
think there's something around that notion too of like, oh, there's just sort of like this tension that we're carrying around in our society. We're exposed to so many noises and visuals and like on screens all the time, and all this stuff is like just sort of like relax. Let whatever is happening, like let it flow down, like let gravity work. Even within meditation, the first thing you do after shutting your eyes is noticing where your feet are resting on the ground, where your butt is sitting on a chair, where your back is resting against the back of the chair, and just sort of like just noticing those points of contact. So I think it's just sort of like grounding yourself, for lack of a better term, and noticing that you're connected to the earth and to the planet. So it's definitely like a little bit of a um, abstract concept. Like I
Yeah.
don't know if I can tell you exactly like what the yoga lesson slash purpose is here, but that's my takeaway from it, is that there's something about like kind of letting go a little bit and just noticing what's happening all the time in a way that you're not normally paying attention to.
Yeah. I think in you talking just now, something clicked for me. Of it's basically just saying like, I guess maybe this is a definition of what being mindful ultimately is or should be, maybe, of taking something that is passive and moving it into the realm of active. Don't let it be passive. Like notice it, be mindful of it, and that helps you either take control of it or use it for your own betterment, maybe. Or notice it in a way that makes you better, at least.
Yeah.
Like maybe it's not something that needs to be harnessed in that way.
Well,
But
yeah, and that your inaction is still a form of action. If you
yeah,
want to get
yeah,
all jazz about it or something. But yeah, I hear
right.
what you're saying.
Yeah, passive to active. That's what clicked for me. Okay, so moving on. An embarrassing success is worse than a proud failure. And I guess this one, like I understand it. I just want to hear an example from your own life about that one.
Hmm. Well, I have to look at my long list of successes that I've had in my life. I'll go to stand up. Like sometimes you just have a joke that works really well, and you're just like, but I don't feel proud of myself for telling that joke. So I guess this ties in with like hack stuff a little bit, because I think about like
Okay.
within comedy, there's hack things, and the worst part about hack material is that it works. There's a reason it's been done over and over again by so many people. There's a reason, dudes are constantly talking about their dicks and women are talking about periods, and like, black people are like this and white people are like that. Like that stuff works. But that doesn't mean that you need to do it, or that when it does work, you should feel proud of it, or that that's the end goal here is like to just do whatever works.
Right.
And then there's other times where I've had, jokes that, didn't get a great response, but like, I'm like, you know, uh, I don't know if I'd say I'm proud of it because your job is to get laughs, but it's also to be like, okay, maybe there's still something there, or maybe I just have to keep working at it, or maybe I have to put it
Right.
aside for a while or come back to it. But yeah, I think there's something about like you know, also, if you were a business and you were profitable, you're making a huge profit off some product, but it was doing something really terrible or hurting people or something else. Like, like it's not expanding your metrics of success away from like the obvious if you're a comedian laughter, if you're a business profit, and being like, well, is what you're doing sustainable? Is it what you actually want to be doing? Are you proud of it? When you tell your grandkids about like how your company made money, will you be ashamed of like the actual explanation? Versus like I think there can be noble failures of being like, hey, I tried to do this thing and it didn't work, but you know what, I'm still really proud of what I made or what I did, or like how far we got even though we didn't get all the way. And just sort of recalibrating what is success, and not just always going by that sort of bottom line metric that's like the easiest one to track.
Yeah, going back to the joke, um, would it be that like a proud failure is one where like you believe in the premise, it was just your execution, your wording wasn't quite right to sell the joke and make it go over. So like it needs work, like you said, but the premise was strong.
Yeah, like a lot of times I think about what's the idea here. Is there an idea that you actually want to communicate that you would
Right.
like society to hear or know about or think about or whatever that is? And you can be like, oh yeah, that was like a noble aspiration. You didn't get laughter at the end, and that's your job as a comedian. And so like maybe it's like as a joke it failed, but like as a idea that you want to communicate, it was a success. Or it
Right.
was at least something that you're like proud of, like, no, I really want to say this thing and I did say it, so I'm proud of that. And another one of the Rubyisms I'm pretty sure is the worst thing you can do is sell out without selling anything. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, that was in there. I saw that
yeah,
one.
and I
Yeah.
feel like that ties in with this too, of like, yeah, you could, try to write like some hit pop song for the radio, uh, but then, if it, like the worst thing of all is like you don't even like the song, and the only reason you wrote it was to try to get it on the radio. By the way, this is assuming radio is still a thing in this analogy, uh, and then you're just like sort of like, you tried to sell out, and then you couldn't even accomplish that. Like that's kind of sadder to me than just
Yeah.
writing exactly the kind of song that you want to write, and maybe it's not a big hit, but like, hey, at least you wrote the thing that you wanted to write.
Yeah, yeah. I've started watching a little bit more. I'm still not on TikTok, but my version of it is Instagram Reels. I'll flip through those when I have a few moments, but don't really have anything else to occupy my time. But like, just need to kill some time or something. Um, and the ones that I just like I swipe away the fastest are the when someone comes on and they're like, please like my song and make it a trending audio. I'm like, ugh, like, are you proud of yourself self for shilling so hard? And I don't even know. It's almost an irrational sort of reaction to it, really, because good for them, I guess. Like they're like it's part of it is me recognizing that I couldn't fathom doing that myself in that blatant a way, but like, hey, whatever. If it's actually a song that you like and you want people to listen to, great. It just like seems weird to be like shilling for it in that way so that people will hear 15 or 30 seconds of it at a time, usually in that environment, you know?
No, I think you're getting at something important about this Rubyism, which is this concept of like, what is success and what is failure and how are you measuring it? Because like,
Yeah.
especially on social media, a lot of times it's like, well, the algorithm liked it. And
Yeah.
is that actual success? Like, because I could do like some crowd work bit where I just like make fun of some dude in the audience for having a dumb job, and that like takes off and gets hundreds of thousands of views. But I could tell a good joke that I think is actually like a good joke, and then that gets only a few hundred or whatever. So like, but I can also be in a room telling those jokes and knowing that they work. So like maybe I need to recalibrate how I'm defining success and failure, and not just viewing it as like the number of views that something gets on Instagram, but instead being like,
Right.
well, no, I know in this room that this joke did well, and like I'm going to go with that as my metric of success, as opposed to letting Mark Zuckerberg decide. You can subscribe to or follow this show just about anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you have a moment, please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Good Pods, or anywhere else that allows you to do that. And when I say that, I mean like leave it a good review. I feel like that's obvious, but if you're just going to leave it a bad review, you don't have to. Anyway, it helps others find the show, which I really appreciate. If you want to reach out to me directly, you can email me at mattruby@hey.com. That's mattruby@hey.com. And if you like this podcast, you should subscribe to the Rubes Letter, where what you just heard first appeared. You can find that at mattrubycomedy.com/subscribe. And while you're at mattrubycomedy.com, you can also find links to my Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok, where I post clips of my stand-up and other stuff too. Thanks so much for listening. I appreciate it.
This podcast is produced by Stereoactive Media.